Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The explosive disposal unit from the Lethbridge police was called to the west side of the city earlier today to deal with a suspicious package. Things heated up on Parliament Hill as the NDP brought forth a motion to recognize the state of Palestine. And we have an update from our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari on if we'll see another ceasefire soon in Gaza as the war between Israel and Hamas continues.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, it was a bit of an uneasy start to a Monday morning as at least 11 different businesses had to be evacuated at the West Lethbridge Town Centre on University Drive West. Lethbridge police were notified that an unknown person had left several packages at H&R Block over the weekend, indicating the contents were important and they would return to retrieve them. When the business opened this morning, staff noticed the boxes were still there and one of them had an image of an explosive device displayed on the outside. Police were called and evacuated the entire strip mall while they brought in their explosive disposal unit to investigate. Around 45 minutes later, police deemed the package to be safe, containing only documents, and allowed employees and patrons back into the mall. Police thanked everyone for their patience and cooperation. There was a heated debate on Parliament Hill as MPs spoke on an NDP motion that calls on the government to recognize the state of Palestine. Conservative MP Melissa Landsman says the motion does nothing to hold Hamas accountable for the October 7th attack that began the war in Gaza. She asked the NDP Foreign Affairs critic Heather McPherson why she's rewarding Hamas terrorists for their October 7th massacre in the House of Commons and that she should really be ashamed of herself. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly, meanwhile, says Canada remains committed to a two-state solution. She also says a ceasefire is needed once more.
The violence must stop. Hostages must be released. Humanitarian aid must go into Gaza. We need to make sure that Israeli and Palestinian civilians are protected. And that is the position of the government. We will be there to make sure that there is long-term peace in the region, and of course to make sure that there is the Jewish community and the Muslim community and all communities across the country are well secured and can live peacefully here as well at home.
Minister Joly says Canada is extremely frustrated that Hamas did not accept a ceasefire deal that was on the table before Ramadan. Israeli forces launched another offensive on the Shifa hospital on Gaza City. The IDF is accusing Hamas of using it as a military base. The chief military spokesperson said the army had launched a high-precision operation in parts of the medical complex.
The IDF is conducting a high-precision operation in limited areas of Shifa Hospital, following concrete intelligence that demanded immediate action. We know that senior Hamas terrorists have regrouped inside the Shifa Hospital and are using it to command attacks against Israel. Our war is against Hamas, not against the people of Gaza. We seek no harm to the civilians that Hamas is hiding behind, which is why we will conduct this operation with caution and care, while ensuring that the hospital continues its important functions.
Meanwhile, the battle between Israel and Hezbollah continues in northern Israel as rockets from both Israel and Lebanon have been fired. TBN Israel's Matthew Shoshani says according to the IDF, the terrorist group Hezbollah last Tuesday alone sent over 100 rockets into Israel.
The first wave consisted of 30 rockets, while the second wave involved 70. Crashes were reportedly witnessed in open areas near En Kunya, Snir, Shar Yishuv, and Kfar Sold. The Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for launching these Katyusha rockets, stating that it was a response to Israel's bombardment of the Baca region on Monday night. As reported by Reuters, as Israel and Hezbollah engaged in a fiery exchange of rockets, sponsored, of course, by Iran's geopolitical theater. The real star remains Iran's mysterious nuclear ambitions, while the international community, ever the concerned onlooker, wonders, hey, is everything kosher behind those veils?
U.S. President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke over the phone for the first time in over a month. The White House did not release any details of the tone or substance of the call. It comes as the United Nations Food Agency warned that famine is imminent in northern Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu recently lashed out at the Biden administration, which suggested perhaps there needs to be a regime change in Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "It is wrong to try to replace elected leaders of a sister democracy and a staunch American ally at any time, but especially during a time of war." Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari has more.
October 8th, a major decision had to be made the day after the war began when Hamas attacked. And any leader in Israel, again, left, right, or center, and I'm not saying they're perfect, the right wing, left wing, they had their own domestic issues leading up to the war. But to believe that this existential threat and the war against rooting out Hamas would be treated any differently it's a false premise to begin with.
Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari will also have more on the landslide victory by Vladimir Putin in the recent Russian election. That's coming up later in our broadcast. Well, official results say Vladimir Putin received 87% of the vote in Russia. That is the highest margin of victory for any president in Russia's history. What many are now asking, what will he do as he secures his fifth term as president with such enormous influence?
Domestically, Putin could use his dominance of Russian politics to implement new repressive measures, adding to the suppression of opposition that has already occurred. Some observers speculate that the LGBTQ community could be a target for him because that group is counter to Putin's emphasis on traditional values in Russia. There's also the question of whether he would call a new mobilization for troops in Ukraine. So far, Putin has said that a new mobilization is not necessary, but in the past he has used election victories to implement unpopular measures. Internationally, Russia is likely to continue to test the determination of the NATO alliance, and there's speculation that Russia could attempt some sort of test of NATO's resolve by launching an attack on a NATO country, not necessarily with troops, but possibly through cyber attacks.
Speaking at a news conference in Georgia, Jens Stoltenberg said Russia's organization of elections in occupied parts of Georgia and Ukraine were completely illegal and never should have taken place to begin with.
And Russia's presidential election was clearly neither free nor fair. Georgia is facing complex security challenges. Russia persists its pursuit of imperial ambitions, and in Ukraine the situation on the battlefield remains difficult. So it is vital that we continue to step up our support.
Well, Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, for the most part, it's been very dry so far this winter and spring. When it comes to much needed moisture here in southern Alberta, a little more of it may be on the way later this week.
Yeah, more moisture, but Hal, unfortunately, I hate to report this, but more cold as well. So we got up to 18 degrees today. Actually, at one point, my car was registering 20 degrees, which is insane considering today was the last official day of winter. So spring begins tomorrow, and with that, unfortunately, we are under a special weather statement that's telling us that a cold front is sweeping across Alberta. With that, the temperature is going to drop significantly. And that's the warm part of the week there. We're going to get into the minuses. Also, a lot of snow. So that's the moisture that you were talking about. So we're expecting 15 to 25 centimeters of snow beginning Tuesday night, intensifying Wednesday and going right through till Friday. So by Friday, by the weekend, we could see up to 25 centimeters of snow. So I'll be back later in the show to tell you about the rest of the week and how long this cold snap is supposed to last.
Another spring snowstorm. Ouch. Now, speaking of snow, the city of Lethbridge wants to gather feedback about what you thought of their snow removal efforts this winter. They've launched an online survey to gather some of the opinions. Now, today the survey was sent to everyone who's downloaded the Loop app and lives along a snow route. It'll also be available on the city's social media pages and their Get Involved project page. Transportation Operations Manager Julianne Rook says the city plowed over 80 kilometers of residential roads. She says so far the most common complaint they've received was how the snow plows blocked people's driveways with snow.
So we will be presenting all the results to council later on this year in June. That's the plan, and then council can direct us to do adjustments or consider changes based on the results and the feedback. We have close to 6,000 people alone living along the snow routes, so it would be nice if we could get up to 1,000 responses. There is a prize available at the end, so we hope that that encourages people. You can actually win a ride along in a snowplow with the City of Lethbridge.
The City of Lethbridge survey will be up until April the 7th. You know, unfortunately, we have not received a lot of moisture so far here in southern Alberta. Many of our reservoirs, especially here in the southwest part of the province, have dried up. We've not had a large snowpack. So how will this really impact our farmers? David Bishop is a farmer out by Barron's, Alberta. He's also the director of Alberta Grains, and he joins us now via Zoom. David, what is the soil like where you are?
Down where we are in the south right now, our soil moisture in the ground is pretty good, better than it has been for probably the last 4 or 5 years. But our irrigation is the issue. We haven't been much of a snowpack, and the reservoirs are low. So we'll probably have a good start to our seeding and to a season of growth. But as soon as the heat hits, if we don't have irrigation, that's going to be an issue.
So when you're looking at beginning spring seeding this year?
Well, we got a pretty good moisture event coming, looks like this week yet, so which is great, and hopefully put snow in the mountains so we have more snowpack. Generally, the last week of April, the first week of May is when we usually get started, and I'm looking like it's probably going to be in that same time frame, normal time of seeding by the looks of it. So the frost is starting to come out, so the water that's laying from the last snow we had that melted, it's starting to disappear. So my best guess is end of April, 1st of May.
So David, with the lack of moisture when it comes to irrigation, are you changing your game plan when it comes to farming?
We don't grow any specialty crops, so we aren't as water dependent on crop type as anybody that's growing like potatoes, for an example, sugar beets. They're much more water, or corn, much more water intensive. So right now, no, other than we're not sure what inputs we're going to put in the ground because we're not sure how much water we're going to have.
Now, the province is already making contingency plans should we see more of a drought this year. You feel the lack of moisture will not only impact you, but many others within the agricultural community?
The worry is, I think, if we have a lack of water, is it's not only affects us, but the municipalities, the cities, the towns, the villages, the processing plants, that process our product, like especially potatoes. They're heavy water users. So what's the economic impact going to be if we are in the drought situation again, where we have to restrict water? That's the unknown.
He's the director of Alberta Grains and a farmer out by Barron's, Alberta. David Bishop, thanks so much for your time today. Farmers west of Edmonton are raising concerns about a proposed land tax. The Lac St. Anne Council says costs are rising to fix roads and bridges and is proposing farmers with 5 or more quarters of land to pay $2,500. Many of the farming communities say the tax would be disastrous given their existing tight profit margins and would open the door to future hikes. The county, however, says some farms already received a break on residential taxes that they need to pay their fair share. The province says if Budget 2024 passes, millions of dollars would be invested over the next few years to upgrade wastewater, which supports communities throughout the Edmonton area. Officials say as populations grow in central Alberta, upgrades are desperately needed at the wastewater treatment plant. Transportation and Economic Corridors Minister Devin Dreeshen says if the budget passes, in total, $481 million will go out to municipalities for grant applications over the next 3 years, and water is top of mind for many people.
We need to manage our water in a sustainable and environmentally friendly way. And so that is why I'm proud to say that in Budget 24 has a $50 million grant to Aero Utilities, former the Edmonton Capital Region Wastewater Commission, to build this project right behind us. So it'll be an impressive investment to Aero Utilities that will increase the treatment of water, and that will also keep water rates affordable to, as Ken mentioned, the 400,000 people living in the Edmonton Capital Region, and will also create a revenue stream, and I promise that's the first and only water pun that I'm going to use today, that will be used to sell fresh water for industrial purposes in the surrounding Edmonton region, and that equates to about 35 million liters per day. That would be taken out of the North Saskatchewan River that will be replaced with this facility. And just putting that into perspective, that's 14 Olympic-sized swimming pools every day that would be drawn out of the North Saskatchewan River that now will not have to be.
Teachers in Saskatchewan are upping the ante in their labor dispute with the government. A one-day province-wide walkout is being planned for Wednesday. That is the same day the province introduces their budget. Contract talks between the two sides have hit a snag over issues such as classroom sizes and other workplace conditions. The teachers want those issues in the contract, but government officials do not. There are many thoughts when it comes to discipling and disciplining a child. Abe Locke, retired pastor, now a great-grandfather, shares some seasoned advice on the importance of teaching kids and how there are consequences for children's actions.
Discipline needs to be in moderation, but it needs to be in relation to what the problem was. Not just some wild thing out there, but try and build it so that they learn there are consequences. Look at the world today. A lot of people haven't learned consequences, and we're living with a lot of difficulty and chaos in our world because there are consequences. As you grow up and get into your job, there are going to be discipline issues. You need to learn them when you're young and when it's not so hard.
Catch more parenting advice from retired Pastor Abe Locke in my interview with him coming up later in our broadcast. Well, it was so nice to enjoy the warm temperatures here in southwestern Alberta to begin our work week, but much colder temperatures, even some flurries, however, are on the way for our region. Full weather details are coming up. Well, the first official day of spring is coming up on Tuesday. It'll certainly feel a lot like spring, but by Wednesday and Thursday, Old Man Winter may pay us a visit once again. Jeanette Rocher is here now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, we could see a 20-degree difference in temperature between now and Thursday?
Yeah, we could, Hal. That is absolutely true. Actually, more than 20 degrees when you look at this. So we're jumping from 18 all the way down to 6. And then we're just going to keep on getting colder as we go along. That's because a cold spell is sweeping across Alberta, bringing with it cold, also lots of moisture. And that's not going to start until Tuesday night. As we get into Wednesday, Thursday, we're starting to see us dipping down into the minuses, also seeing 15 to 25 centimeters of snow accumulating by a Friday. So a high of -7 on Thursday, down to -9 on Friday, and then -8 on Saturday, -7 on Sunday. Also looking at a snowy weekend as well. So what a difference from today, which is the last official day of winter, and this last weekend of winter, where we were out in the park in our tank tops, and now we're going to be hitting the slopes again next weekend. So that is spring in southern Alberta. What can we say? So average high for this time of year, 6 degrees. Average low, -6. 18, that was our high temperature. That happened back in 2004. And -25, that was the chilliest on record, happening in 1965. 7:37, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 7:43. We are looking at 12 hours and 6 minutes of daylight now, so we're past that 12-hour mark. Sunshine on the west coast is expected. Victoria sitting at 17, more like 13 by the water. 14 for a high in Vancouver, warmer inland, more like 20 degrees, lovely. 0 for a high in Edmonton. Edmonton going to see that drop in temperature from today to tomorrow as well, also looking at a 30% chance of flurries. Calgary, very similar to Lethbridge with that drastic drop in temperature expected this week, also sitting under that special weather statement, as they could also see 15 to 25 centimeters of snow accumulating throughout the week by Friday. That is happening in Calgary. In the rest of the prairie, seeing that slight drop in temperature from today to tomorrow, getting back into the minuses there. -6 for a high in Saskatoon, -2 in Regina, -7 for a high in Winnipeg. Winnipeg seeing 60% chance of flurries. Flurries also expected in the central part of the country. Toronto looking at a 30% chance of flurries, high of 2, high of 1 in Ottawa with a 40% chance. 3 for a high in Montreal with partly cloudy skies. Now, as we get into the Maritimes, Fredericton sitting at 5 degrees for a high tomorrow, mix of sun and cloud. Halifax seeing clear skies, 7 for a high. Charlottetown could see some showers, could see some flurries as well, high of 5, and 3 for a high. And St. John seeing a mix of showers and flurries as well there. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
The heads of Canada's 3 largest telecom companies say that internet and phone prices are coming down. The CEOs of TELUS, Bell and Rogers told MPs today that Canadians are being hit by the cost of increased data usage, high spectrum costs, and regulatory conditions. They cited recent Stats Canada information showing wireless prices are down 16% over the past year. Ottawa is studying the affordability and accessibility of wireless and broadband services. It was prompted to look into the issue when Rogers confirmed prices were going up by an average of $5 for wireless customers who are not on a contract. Insurance companies are warning of what it expects will be another destructive wildfire season across Western Canada. The Insurance Bureau of Canada is warning BC residents to prepare for some potentially difficult months ahead following the worst ever wildfire season that destroyed hundreds of homes last year. The BC Wildfire Service map shows a number of small blazes that have sparked over the past few days as the province experiences above normal temperatures. Close to 100 active wildfires are still smoldering as holdovers from last year. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 11 points on the day to finish at 21,837. The Dow was up 75 points to 38,790. The S&P 500 was up 32 on the day to 5149, and the Nasdaq was up 130 points to 16,103. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up $1.77 to $82.81 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 6 cents to $1.72 US. Gold was up $4.46 on the day to $21.6036 US an ounce, and silver was down 15 cents to $25.04 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.16 per bushel, barley's at $6.21, canola's at $13.91, and corn is at $7.44 per bushel. Live cattle April contract was up $1.33 to $188.58. Feeder cattle were up $1.93 to $251.20, and lean hogs April contract was down 10 cents to 86.83. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 73.90 US. Recapping one of our top stories, 11 different businesses had to be evacuated at the West Lethbridge Town Centre shopping district located on University Drive on Monday afternoon. Lethbridge police were notified that an unknown person had left several packages at H&R Block over the weekend, indicating the contents were important and that they would return to retrieve them. When the business opened this morning, staff noticed that the boxes were still there, and one of them had an image of an explosive device displayed on the outside. Police were called and evacuated the entire strip mall while they brought in their explosive disposal unit to investigate. Around 45 minutes later, officials deemed the package to be safe, containing only documents, and allowed employees and patrons back into their establishments. Will we see another ceasefire in the Gaza Strip between Israel and Hamas? Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, will give us her thoughts in just a few moments. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, visit our website anytime to check out a number of local stories and interviews. According to the Financial Times, Iranian officials requested the Biden administration to broker a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. Now, to chat about this in more detail is the host of the Foreign Desk and our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining us once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, didn't both governments already meet privately back in January in Oman to discuss a potential ceasefire?
Yes, and on the sidelines, of course, Iran's regime, the puppeteer of all of this, making demands because they can. This was a meeting between a private meeting between the United States and Iran's regime, where the United States wanted to get the message to Tehran to please, pretty please, curb your proxies, stop shooting at us in the Red Sea, curb those Houthis. And instead, Iran turns around and says, no, you know what? Why don't you work on that ceasefire? And putting the pressure on the United States. And of course, it just illustrates how far we've come in terms of emboldening this regime. Not only do they support Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthis and all these different proxies and insurgencies throughout the region, they're the ones telling the United States what to do and trying to control our foreign policy. If you look at a lot of the foreign policy that's coming out of the White House, it looks like they have actually have been listened to in a lot of ways. And most recently, another $10 billion released to Iran's regime, empowering them further, giving them the signal that the White House will listen to them, will loosen the sanctions, will, abide by what they want. And right now we have, we're in an election year, so it doesn't look like things are going to change anytime soon, only going to get worse in terms of appeasement of our enemies.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lashed out at the Biden administration, which suggested, at least perhaps, there needs to be a little bit of a regime change in Israel. Netanyahu said, quote, "It is wrong to try to replace elected leaders of a sister democracy and a staunch American ally at any time, but especially during a time of war."
Right. And it's an interesting thing for the United States to now focus on Bibi Netanyahu as a right-wing candidate and to even bring in any sort of partisan politics right now. It is very, very wrong for anyone to assume that if anyone else was in office in the place of Bibi Netanyahu, left, right, or center, that they would react any differently to an existential threat like Hamas. October 8th, a major decision had to be made the day after the war began when Hamas attacked. And any leader in Israel, again, left, right, or center, and I'm not saying they're perfect, the right wing, left wing, they had their own domestic issues leading up to the war. But to believe that this existential threat and the war against rooting out Hamas would be treated any differently is really it's a false premise to begin with. Secondly, it looks as though the Biden White House has pivoted a bit to appease the progressives that are either in Congress, in office, or progressive voters, to now look at the election and say, well, we don't want to lose states like Michigan, for example, a major swing state here, but with a large population of Muslim voters that perhaps would believe that the Biden administration's policies are too pro-Israel, they favor Israel, our ally, too much, and are now trying to backstep a bit and trying to pivot and call on Bibi Netanyahu, for example. Like, his head has to roll in order for the United States to pivot their position to say, we're not so pro-Israel, but it was Bibi's fault that this happened to begin with. False premise. People in Israel don't believe this. They may have their own issues with Bibi, by the way, domestically, but when it comes to this war, the majority of Israelis believe that they have to root out Hamas. It's an existential threat. Their kids, their own safety, everyone's safety is on the line here. Israel's, the safety and security and future of Israel is on the line here. So I think that has to be pivoted a bit. The second thing I want to say is that to believe that these small concessions or a pivot in the policy or any sort of change in the Israel policy coming from the White House would appease those types of voters is absolutely wrong. When they're chanting from the river to the sea on streets in America, and I know that it's happening in Canada as well, that means a complete root out of the state of Israel, meaning Israel should be taken off the map. It does not mean that they want small concessions like the removal of Bibi Netanyahu or to scale back in Rafah. Those small movements or appeasement or concessions, whatever you want to call them, it's not going to work for these types of opinions.
We'll talk about the rise in anti-Semitism here in North America in just a few moments, Lisa. But in the meantime, leaders from Hamas, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad held a recent meeting in Beirut, and the talk centered on aligning efforts for the continuation of fighting the Israeli military in Gaza.
Right. And one of the narratives that has been lost throughout the last few months since October 7th was the Wall Street Journal expose that actually underscored the fact that more than one terror organization met with Iran's regime before October 7th was launched. And they agreed upon aligning their efforts, exactly what this meeting wanted to double down on, to say that we will attack Israel from all fronts. And to believe, again, that any one of these groups is better than the other, that will be the future of the Palestinian people. Again, very, very naive to believe that could be the case. Iran is funding multiple terror groups in the region. They want them all. They want all guns pointing towards Israel, and they are doing so in a very quick way. Again, very much reflective of the policies here in the West that are not stopping them from moving forward. The fact that the Houthis are shooting at all carriers coming through the Red Sea, the fact that you have insurgencies inside Syria and Iraq and Hezbollah in Lebanon, everyone is moving in because they see that this is a ripe moment in order to attack, again, Israel, who is our ally, but a weakened Israel because of the attacks and because of the lack of support coming from the White House.
Let's talk about the other war that Israel is dealing with right now. You touched on it a little bit earlier, and that's the war in the north against Hezbollah, which keeps firing rockets on the Jewish state. Lisa, how is the Iron Dome holding up so far to protect Israelis?
The Iron Dome has been a blessing and a curse in the sense that it has been obviously more than a blessing, I should say, than anything else, and I want to backtrack on that, because missiles are coming into Israel daily. Even before October 7th, the Iron Dome was doing its duty in order to keep civilians safe from random indiscriminate rockets coming into civilian areas. So obviously it's doing its job. The reason I say it's a bit of a curse is because it also has been a bit of a blind spot in combating more new and more outside of the box types of threats that have come up from Hezbollah, from Hamas. Look, it's very daunting to fight an enemy that is working 24/7 for your destruction, for your genocide, to destroy you, your state, and your people forever throughout the world. And because of that, they go back to the drawing board. And Israel, as much as it has its technologies and its innovations and all of that, they go back to life as usual. So I think October 7th was a bit of a wake-up call. The Iron Dome is absolutely helpful. But when you look at these tunnel systems, for example, in Gaza, the fact that Hamas has been working so quietly, stealthily on these tunnel systems, the sophistication, the depth, the breadth of these tunnels, it just goes to show that you can catch them in the air, but what are you going to do underground? It just goes to show how dedicated they are to their terrorism. It's this new world meets old world. So it's the old terrorism, of jihad and wanting to kill and wanting to murder Jews, but at the same time meeting these new technologies that they have developed. And again, a whole world underground. And of course, Hezbollah, being the next front, has been very calculating, of course, those directives coming from Iran's regime as to how often to attack Israel, with what, how to escalate this. And it looks like they will be entering into another war. It's just a matter of what that timing will be, again, dictated by Iran's regime.
Let's talk about anti-Semitism, the elephant in the room here in North America, Lisa. We've seen instances and attacks in Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, and in Toronto. Police in Toronto have responded to 989 hate crime calls since October 7th. That's a 93% increase compared to a year ago. And there have been 84 hate crimes alone since January, with 56% being anti-Semitic in nature. Many are angry at what they're calling a genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Now, there's a report that a 50-year-old man, Scott Hannaford, has been arrested for allegedly burning down a Fort Lauderdale, Florida Jewish community center. So not just here in Canada, but in the United States as well.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of this, whether it's on college campuses, they're beating people up. I mean, it's become very, very violent attacks. This is just premise, right? What does a college student getting beat up, or a Chabad center, a Jewish center in Florida, being burned to the ground with the rabbi's car being set on fire as well, have to do with any sort of dispute over land that goes back to biblical times in the Middle East? It's really just an excuse, a premise to kill Jews, to, of course, express their anti-Semitism at a time when these emotions are so heightened. We're seeing a lot of it on social media being promoted by a lot of influencers who have millions and millions of followers, who are blindly, advocating for either boycott of things that Jewish-owned businesses, or advocating just for anti-Semitism and violence, and to attack Jewish students, and to attack Jewish, politicians, and to go after any business that's owned by Jews. There was a deli or cafe in New York City this morning. I saw they wrote, line starts here if you want to support genocide. And, the neighbors came out and started scrubbing the ground along with the owner of the deli. It's horrific. It's horrific. It's anti-West, it's anti-American, it's anti-Canadian, it's anti-human. I mean, there's no reason for this. This wouldn't be accepted against any other race, religion, creed, across the board. So I think that, as we always say, the first they come for the Jews and then for everyone else. So I don't think any one of us should sit and bear witness to this without calling it out. I also think that, there has to be a better job coming from the top. When the White House, for example, pivots on its position against Bibi, that does promote more anti-Semitism. It gives that kind of okay to say, oh, well, it is the Jews. It was their fault. And I think there needs to be a better job. And when Kamala Harris comes out to talk about anti-Semitism and first mentions Islamophobia, of course, nobody wants Islamophobia. Nobody wants racism. Nobody wants anti-Semitism. But when there's an issue, we have to talk about it. Just like everyone would get upset when we would say all lives matter, not just Black lives matter. Because at that moment, the issue was against African Americans. Right now, the issue is against the Jewish community. And we all, as a global community, need to unite behind them and to say, enough is enough. I don't think this is something that will go away with this war. I think it's here to stay, especially if it's not rooted out. It's going to be something that's going to become completely normalized, unfortunately.
Lisa, Russian President Vladimir Putin won the federal election in his country with a record 87% of the vote. He's already led Russia for 24 years. Was there ever any doubt?
Right. Another 6 years in the books for Putin. Look, of course, I had people writing me on Twitter because of the headlines we were posting and saying, don't call it an election. And I put the, election in the single quote because, of course, he is a dictator. He's, an anarchist, however you want to look at it. But I will say one thing that perhaps is not on the radar of most. A lot of Russians have rallied behind Putin in his invasion of Ukraine, and that has given him some more clout at home, where before there was less, because of the economy, because of a lot of different domestic issues back in Russia, because of the crackdowns, etc. This may be an increase in his popularity, but also it's hard to tell because this is always rigged, and of course he was going to be issue, and regardless. So, we shall see. I think this is going to be an important couple of years for Putin, for Russia, for the discussion around what role will Russia play on the global stage, and what do they want after Ukraine? I mean, let's say that we do give him an off-ramp on Ukraine, or there is some sort of ceasefire that is meaningful and long-lasting within that war. What will be next for Putin? And I think that that's a big question that a lot of people are not talking about.
Now, speaking of elections, yours is coming up this November. It'll be Biden against Trump once again, the rematch. How much of an impact on the Trump campaign will all of his court cases really have?
I think once they're done with, it doesn't look like, on the one hand, right now, it looks like, a lot of those who stand behind him staunchly stand behind him. They think that the court cases are bogus. They think a lot of the pressure and the media is bogus because they just want to target Trump. So for those who are his core constituents, it won't matter at all. For moderate voters, I think we'll have to see how the Biden campaign shapes up. Look, his State of the Union, he came out very strong in terms of energy. I don't know if he had a bunch of Red Bull or espressos or what he did, but he came out very energetic to kind of, quash those, the talk of him being senile and not having the energy and not having the capacity. Of course, there's that's a fact. I mean, his age, the fact that he has made so many mistakes and continues to, and they will question his capability to serve another 4 years. Look, if Biden can show up with energy and to say, I am capable of another 4 years, all he has to do is say Trump is nuts and crazy and look at all these lawsuits and look at all these issues. And I think a lot of the moderate voters may be apprehensive about putting their support behind Trump. So we shall see. I think what's up for grabs here is obviously women voters, moderate voters, minority voters who may be on the fence about either candidate, really. I think it's going to be, for a lot of people, this will be voting for the worst of two evils. So we shall see how each camp shapes up and whether it actually will be Biden versus Trump once we get to November.
No, exactly. We only have a few short moments left here, Lisa, but I wanted to talk to you about the Princess of Wales, Kate Middleton. A new sighting for Kate Middleton, the first since her abdominal surgery in January. There's been a lot of conspiracy floating around as to why we haven't seen her.
Right, we haven't seen her. We don't really know the full story, which leads people on social media who are obsessed with the royals to come up with their own pictures and their own narratives and their own timelines and just leave her alone. Look, many people would disagree with me and say, you can't leave them alone. They're in the spotlight. They're royals. They should give people more information. They should give them more so that they can kind of stop with all the conspiracies. But it looks as though she came out to go to the local market. There aren't any pictures, by the way, of that outing, but there was a supposed outing and people saw, there were witnesses. So people want pictures, people want information so that the tabloids don't go on making their own assumptions. But it looks as though she had her surgery in mid-January and she won't be in the public eye or serving in her position until after Easter. So we have a couple weeks until we see what really happened. If people can just be, kind of assuaged by the narrative that comes out after Easter. So let's just give them a couple weeks.
Exactly. She's our royal family and foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Thanks so much for joining us once again from Los Angeles.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
I think it's safe to say that parenting has always been a challenge. We learn from our successes and our failures. Books, training courses, and those with parenting experience also really helps along the way. Today we're joined by Abe Block, who's a parent, grandparent, and now even a great-grandparent, and a retired pastor here in Lethbridge. He has some parenting tips for us. Welcome back to Bridge City News, Abe.
Thank you. It's good to be here, and it's good to be with all the listeners that are tuning in.
Absolutely, and the viewers too. Now, one thing that probably hasn't changed over the years, Abe, is that siblings tend to have conflicts as they grow up together. You know, brothers and sisters, various disagreements and arguments. Do you have any advice on how to reduce the frequency of this to get your kids to maybe learn to disagree with each other and still love each other?
That's a major issue. Back in my day, and of course that was a while ago, you'll understand, things were a little different. You did mention that today things have changed. They've changed dramatically, but I think one of the biggest issues, Hal, is the lack of communication. I look at the world today and I understand the young people watching the world today, and what do they see? They see a lot of disagreement. They see a lot of arguing. They see a lack of communication in our society, in our governments relating to people and to us. Wars and rumors of wars. And you look at Haiti in the world today, if you're following that at all, I mean, it's absolute chaos. And you say to yourself, this is what our children are seeing. Is it any surprise that they think the natural thing is to disagree and to argue? The other issue could be that if you don't agree with me, you can't be my friend. And so I think that's one of the key issues. And so we as parents, we need to set up a time. The Bible says, train up a child in the way that it should go. And when it is old, it will remember and learn and be. How do we train? The other thing that reminds me is that in our world as well, we have husband and wife working so much out of the home. So where do we find time to train and to teach? With my children, I set up what I call the Yes But Conference every so often, where we would sit down. Every child could speak what their issues were, what they liked, what they didn't like, and no one could respond negatively. Each one got a chance, and that meant that we as parents were listening. We heard them. And then we also had opportunity to train and respond. I think that's one of the biggest things. If we can't train, how are they going to learn? And we live in chaos.
Yeah, communication is key, absolutely, for siblings and then parents to their kids. Now, how about forgiveness and apologies, Abe? How important are they as we develop a stronger relationship with our kids and grandkids?
I think that's a great thing. Apologies and forgiveness work together. And it depends on what is an apology. You see, so often in our world, we simply hear, well, I'm sorry. And what kind of a response? Oh, don't even think about it. Well, that's not dealing with anything. If I'm going to apologize, I need to apologize to the issue. What was the issue? That's what I'm apologizing for, and it needs to be from the heart. And then the response needs to be a response to the issue. Never say, oh, it was nothing. What needs to be said is, yes, you hurt me, and I thank you for the apology, and I really want to forgive you. But that doesn't mean that there's going to be reconciliation. When the apology is correct and the response is to the issue, you're opening the door for reconciliation. And I think that's one of the keys in all of this. I think back to what our government is trying to do with truth and reconciliation with our Aboriginal people. Okay, where's the truth and what's the reconciliation? Have we ever spelled it out? And so if you don't spell these things out to each other, it's just, I'm sorry, don't worry about it. That doesn't go anywhere in my books.
Abe, let's talk about discipline for just a moment here. I know when my son was younger, he hated the fact we put him in the corner, standing all alone in the corner, you know, to show some discipline, but he'd appreciate it afterwards, and he would apologize, and we would clear the air about certain things, maybe if there's a misunderstanding as well. How important is discipline and maybe setting up that structure for our kids today?
I think discipline is increasingly important. In our world, if there's not going to be that kind of a setup, the world isn't going to cater to you. For example, I see a lot of parents in the modern world saying to their 2-year-old child, "What do you want for breakfast?" Day after day, what do you want for lunch, et cetera, et cetera. You know, that child is way too young to make those decisions.
Chocolate. I want chocolate. Give me chocolate.
I want chocolate.
And ice cream. And ice cream, right?
That's not going to be the world they get into at all. And so I think discipline needs to be in moderation, but it needs to be in relation to what the problem was. Not just some wild thing out there, but try and build it so that they learn there are consequences. Look at the world today. A lot of people haven't learned consequences, and we're living with a lot of difficulty and chaos in our world, because there are consequences. As you grow up and get into your job, there are going to be discipline issues. You need to learn them when you're young and when it's not so hard.
Let's circle back to structure for just a moment here, Abe. How important is it to really set up the boundaries for our kids?
Well, I think that's the key issue. If the kids raised without any boundaries when they're young, they're not going to expect any boundaries when they go and work in an organization, and there are going to be boundaries, and they've never learned that. So how are they going to deal with boundaries when they've got a job if they've never learned it when they're young? We need to teach when they're younger so that they learn it and walk into life and walk into occupations and walk into situations with people where they need to learn to listen. And I think a lot of our young people do want boundaries. I remember the one dad talking to me, and his daughter was invited by the school to an issue where she knew she probably shouldn't go. And so she said to her dad, "Dad, will you please tell me I can't go? That way I save face when I face my kids, and you can take the blame, but you're not in the picture." I think that works.
Now, what's the balance between setting healthy boundaries, Abe, and on the flip side, giving your kids and maybe your teenagers some freedom?
I think the freedom comes when they learn where the freedom is within boundaries. For example, for the younger children, give them space, but set the boundaries. For example, I know some girls, when they start school, they already want to dress the way they want to dress. And so I would suggest to the mother, pick up what you think are reasonable ones, but give them an option about 3 or 4. But don't give them an option of the whole expanse of what they have, because that's not suitable. So let them make choices within boundaries so that they learn, okay, I can make a choice, but there are boundaries, because in life, that's how it's going to be. I'm going to have boundaries, but I'm also going to be able to learn how to make choices. Like with finances, give them small finances at the beginning so they can learn to be responsible and accountable, but within the boundaries of whatever their finances are.
Now let's talk about, we mentioned the boundaries, but how about when your kids disagree with you when it comes to set boundaries? You know, I used to ask my father, well, why can't I do this? He said, because I said so. That was always his reasoning behind it, right? Well, no, kids need more than that. So how do we nurture that relationship and create a positive, healthy relationship when we're setting those boundaries?
Well, I can think of an example in my own life. My one daughter didn't have her driver's license yet, and she worked at a record shop, and the guy had a beautiful souped up, well, not a souped up car, but a very nice car, but he wanted to sell it. And she looked at that car and she wanted to buy it all the best way. So what can I do but say no? No, I didn't say no. I sat down with her. I said, okay, how can we work this out? Because you can't even drive it. If you're going to buy it, it's going to sit on the yard and just whatever. So I happened to have a friend who taught mechanics in the school, and he needed vehicles to teach mechanics to the kids. So I said to my daughter, go ahead and buy the thing. Let's talk to this guy, see if he'll take the car, use it for a whole year in the school. You'll get a car that's fixed up by the time you can drive it. That way you can get it, but there are boundaries set up and you're going to have to wait for it. I think if we can set up things like that with our kids to make them feel positive and yet within some kind of control factors. I think that might work.
You know, it's funny, when I was 16, I bought my first car, an old Datsun. I had just enough money, $1,000 to buy it, but it was a manual transmission, so I had to learn how to shift the manual transmission. And then I had to save up more money to insure it and register to put it on the road. So that took another 3-4 months. So
Exactly, but that's a good plan. That works.
yeah, it was a lesson, a life lesson, absolutely. So Abe, how important is it for parents to maybe play some games or activities with their kids to help maybe draw them a little closer for bonding, like bonding time with our children?
We talked about communications before. What better way to communicate with your kids than either play games with them or to do sports with them? It opens the door to conversation, and communication is the best thing. And especially if you're catering to some of their desires, even if you're not an athlete or anything, but you can support, you can be there, et cetera, et cetera. I think I've done a lot of counseling, and I asked this one couple once, what do you remember most about your parents? And the one person said, my dad was at every game I ever played. But the other person said, my dad loved me more than I could ever imagine. You know, those are two opposites, but they're both beautiful, and they bring in communication. I think we have forgotten the idea of communicating and then still disagreeing, but communicating and loving each other anyway. We don't have to think the same, but we need to be on the same page in the final end.
You know what I've noticed as a parent myself as well of 2 kids, my son and my daughter, is praising them, especially with their successes and helping them through their failures as well. What did we learn? Like a life lesson that's learned here. Abe, another big part of parenting is the process of passing our faith onto our children. How can we do this most effectively?
Well, we need to find time, first of all. I mean, like I said before, with all parents doing so much working outside of the home, and I'm not decrying that. It's a necessity in our world, I think. But it seems like that takes away time. And putting your faith in an encouraging way with your children is going to take time. And part of that time, I, for example, like to have devotions once a day. My dad had devotions every supper time. We always took 15, 20 minutes for him to teach us his faith. And then he had a question and answer period after we had eaten, if we had any questions about it. The other thing is, can we take them either to home groups or to Bible study groups or to church or to places like that? And that refers me back to how communicative is my church to everybody and including youth? Do I have people in the church that can communicate and relate to the young people and build their faith? But it's got to start at home. We cannot depend on the church to do it all. We are responsible to begin that process when they're young, and then we encourage them as they mature to find it in other places as well.
And very important to live our faith as well. Abe, I think most of us as children when we were younger had some insecurity issues. What child didn't? Any thoughts on the importance of hugging and loving our children, like the physical touch and communicating that love to our children?
Well, you're talking to the wrong guy. I'm a hugger, and I love to hug, but I have to be very careful. In our modern world, that's not accepted by everybody. It's not even accepted by society in many ways. We have become very individualistic. And so I have had to become very sensitive to how people feel about being hugged and about touching. I remember, especially during COVID, now this was during COVID, but out in New Brunswick, there was a kindergarten boy who hugged one of the kindergarten girls, and they took him to court. Now that's really extreme, but they did take him to court because he wasn't supposed to hug anybody. But you know, we are missing the personal touch. That is so encouraging. And if we can just live with it without reacting, I think it's a very positive thing. I think touch is crucial. The Bible tells us, what did Jesus do? He took the little children and he put them on his lap. And I'm thinking he hugged them. Suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not. We have gotten to the stage of a little bit too much forbidding. I think the encouragement needs to be there.
You know, you're right. The human interaction is vital to healthy relationships. whatever
Yes.
they are. Now, it seems we're getting busier and busier these days, Abe, with scattered schedules for parents, many different family members always on the road. How important is it to sit down during family time and have meals together?
I think that's a key. In my family, when I grew up, we always had at least one meal together. The supper meal, we were together. Nowadays, with the kids scattering all over the place, the parents taking them here and there, find one meal where you can be together. Even at the beginning of the day, that's not possible anymore. Some dads are leaving at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the kids aren't even out of bed yet, getting ready for school. There needs to be a place. It doesn't have to be around a meal. I like the meal idea because that's open discussion. That's where everybody's just relaxed and they're eating and they're joking, and it's a good place for interaction and for discussion and for questions. But nowadays, it's hard to sit down to a meal together with even the kids going all over the place. But my idea is somewhere, find a time in the day, and if it's not every day, find a time somewhere during the week, a couple of times, to sit together as a family. That's relationships. That's necessary in many areas of our lives.
Let's sit down and break bread together. Abe Block is a retired Lethbridge pastor. He's also a grandfather, great-grandfather, and of course a father. Thanks so much for some of the great parenting advice today, Abe.
My joy. God bless.
You as well. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks for watching.